We have a great phrase today on the Bloomberg talking about a year of fire and ice. The decade began really with everything crumbling and a lot of panic. And now we're sort of heading into a new year when apparently nothing can go wrong.
There was some feeling in the White House that this virus was so contagious that it was almost inevitable that people were going to get it.
For weeks and weeks, China and the WHO was downplaying what was happening.
There was resistance to impose a strict lockdown because it's one of the industrial hubs of Italy.
The outbreak itself is unprecedented, but divisiveness in which it is evolving is unprecedented.
The idea back then that a vaccine would be the way out of this was quite crazy at the beginning.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China.
We have to operate in a political context.
We were in uncharted territory.
Everything we did was right.
"2020 was a year like no other. It was a tale of government missteps, missed opportunities to contain the virus, and mixed messaging that left many uncertain of the risks and divided on the cures. 2021 begins with reasons for optimism, but experts see more viral threats ahead. If we have any hope to bring an end to this pandemic, in which at least 2 million are expected to die, and protect against future outbreaks, we need to understand what went wrong with our global response. Starting at the beginning.
I still remember the first time we saw a report. Actually, stocks started tanking because there was this rumor circulating online that there was a mysterious pneumonia that was detected in Wuhan.
There's growing concern across Asia as the Wuhan pneumonia outbreak continues to spread.
I'd actually just come back from Wuhan reporting on a separate story, and I still remember us joking about, good thing you didn't fall sick and we hope you didn't catch anything.
In early January, hospitals in Wuhan faced an onslaught of severely sick patients, and antibiotic treatments weren't working. The local healthcare system started to break down.
We sent a couple of headlines and we were kind of, like, oh, wouldn't it be crazy if there was another SARS?
China has announced the first death from an outbreak of pneumonia caused by an unidentified virus.
By January 10th, Chinese scientists had mapped out the genetic makeup of the virus that would be shared with infectious disease experts worldwide. At that time, 41 people were diagnosed with the virus.
It was a gradual evolution and awareness of just how bad it could be. It went from a curiosity to, over a period of a few months, an impending disaster.
Within weeks, the pathogen is running riot throughout Wuhan's population of 11 million, as well as the broader central Chinese province of Hubei.
And then on January 23rd, they shut down Wuhan. And that was the moment we knew that it was serious.
A city of 11 million people with almost no one on the streets.
People in Wuhan have been asked not to leave the city, and outsiders have been told to stay away.
It took effect at 10 a.m. the next day. Even people in Wuhan didn't know what it really meant.
It's kind of difficult to get the perspective of how drastic a move that was back then. When that happened and they announced that they were quarantining Wuhan, that was pretty much the biggest quarantine that anybody had ever experienced in recent history.
Groceries were flying off the shelves, people were stocking up, people were trying to get out, trying to get on the last train, trying to drive out of the city. There was a lot of confusing information.
I wanted to get my medication, but this pharmacy is closed.
If this situation continues for 1 or 2 more weeks, it'll get more complicated.
What took people by surprise is that, the message from China for so long was that it was not a big deal, and suddenly they escalated it so abruptly with not laying the groundwork with anybody.
China's still uncontrolled viral outbreak comes just ahead of the week-long Lunar New Year holidays. It's the biggest annual human migration in the world, when millions of tourists fan out across Asia and Europe. Public health experts feared a massive seeding of the virus across the globe.
The government prevented a lot of people from returning to the cities after Chinese New Year. And that really affected a lot of people. They weren't able to make money, they weren't able to go back to their jobs.
And I think that was a really crucial moment in just establishing the fact that we were in uncharted territory and that everything going on was now on a level that had never been experienced for a long time.
By the end of January, the World Health Organization declared the virus a public health emergency of international concern. It wouldn't call it a pandemic until March 11th. Some critics fault it for being too slow. A WHO official said the organization had been sounding the alarm well before making its official call.
Once you label something as a pandemic, there is a tendency on the part of certain groups of people to shrug their shoulders and say, oh no, pandemic is here, we just might as well get on and limit the damage as much as possible. Whereas the message that we all wanted to convey from the end of January was, this is a really nasty virus. Don't underestimate it.
The most challenging part of that initial phase of the crisis is that for weeks and weeks, China and the WHO was downplaying what was happening. Wuhan finally admitted there was human-to-human transmission, but they were saying there was not that much. WHO repeated that.
At this point, the Chinese government was under heavy criticism for not communicating effectively with the public, releasing little information on the size and scope of the crisis.
China wanted to keep people from coming in to investigate the origin of the virus, which is still an extremely sensitive topic in China right now.
The WHO was widely criticized by the international community for praising China in the early stages of the pandemic. But according to the WHO, they had no choice.
People who are given responsibility in public health, we're not able just to call the shots all the time. We have to operate in a political context. Our colleagues in China were dealing with an acute problem. We're trying to collect data about that acute problem. We're trying also to work inside the country on how severe it was. We're then deciding to close down a city of several million population very, very quickly.
A lot of China's missteps came from the virus being so new, and no country ever having dealt with such a situation before.
China, as a political system, has a tendency towards non-disclosure. And when there is something unknown, they have a tendency to want things to be stable, to be quiet. They always err on the side of not doing anything, not saying anything.
There was also a lot of information leaking out on social media. Some of that would get censored. It's very difficult to tell what was real and what was not real.
Public information about the novel virus, its symptoms and level of contagiousness were limited. Some experts did try to raise the alarm.
When Li Wenliang died, he was a doctor who had warned his former classmates and his friends about a virus that he had heard was spreading and had made other doctors sick, and he was saying it could be another SARS and that everybody should take precautions. And the government sanctioned him and other people in the WeChat group. That was really one of the moments when it became clear to both the government and the international community just how much was at stake. It wasn't just about containing the virus, but it was what the virus stood for, which was whether or not the Chinese system would prevail and whether or not all the things that people give up would ultimately benefit them if it meant that their government could contain this deadly pandemic.
China was also reluctant to let World Health Organization infectious disease experts into the country until the disease had already spread around the globe.
The WHO ultimately did send a team to China, but the trip was extremely tightly controlled by the government. It also wasn't clear what China's plan was. It had shut down Wuhan and had shut down Hubei, but it was still struggling to communicate with the rest of the world what was going on, and it hadn't shut China's borders yet to the rest of the world.
With approximately 10,000 confirmed cases of COVID in China, the Trump administration uses travel restrictions to limit the transmission risk from China.
Any U.S. citizen returning to the United States who has been in Hubei province in the previous 14 days will be subject to up to 14 days of mandatory quarantine.
The Chinese people, together with the Chinese government, have gone through huge difficulties and made great sacrifices. Globally, China has also fulfilled its duty of helping control the spread of the virus.
While Wuhan would remain under strict lockdown, the virus, then known officially as SARS-CoV-2, had jumped to Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Europe. Its destructive force was keenly felt in Italy, specifically its business center of Milan.
I went with my kid to the kindergarten to tell a bunch of 5-year-old kids what does it mean being a journalist. And then we left in the evening to go to my parents' place, which is near Venice. As soon as we got to the Venice area, the number of cases in Italy had already jumped from 1 to dozens. And as I was going to bed, I got a WhatsApp message confirming me the first Italian fatalities related to coronavirus.
2 more people had died, so that is 14 deaths in Italy. And the number has also jumped. It is now more than 500.
There was resistance to impose a strict lockdown because it's one of the industrial hubs of Italy. Some leaders were saying Milan is open for business.
Failure to quickly take action would result in massive deaths at nursing homes from a complex disease the virus causes, called COVID-19. Milan's hospital system is so overwhelmed that makeshift morgues are required. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte pushed the world's 8th largest economy with more than 60 million inhabitants into virtual quarantine. A preview of what was to come in New York, Sao Paulo, and Mumbai.
We were the first Western country to face the pandemic. No one had before an experience, so we were essentially leading the way, obviously a green way, for the rest of the Western world.
Even as Italy locked down, the virus stormed across Western Europe and into the Middle East, eventually landing on American shores as outbreaks took hold in both Seattle and New York. But unlike countries like China and South Korea that took swift and dramatic government-led action to contain the spread of the virus, President Donald Trump downplays the risk and projects confidence.
That's the thing that I still don't fully understand, is how come there was a very clear account of what to do to get on top of this that came back from this joint mission in China. What was it that led so many countries to conclude that they would not follow the lessons from that China experience and they would go about it differently?
Words about a pandemic at this point?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
He knew that the virus could be very dangerous. He'd been told in classified briefings that this could really rip through the nation and kill a lot of people.
Jennifer Jacobs is Bloomberg's senior White House reporter.
He didn't want to be alarmist. He didn't want people to stop going out and shopping and keeping the economy moving forward.
Mr. President, happy Super Bowl Day.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you.
Coronavirus, I think we're now up to our 8th case in the United States. How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down coming in from China. We can't have thousands of people coming in who may have this problem, the coronavirus.
On February 5th, as cases began to show in the United States, the CDC would send testing kits to labs around the country. However, soon after, those kits would ultimately prove to have a faulty component, delaying widespread testing in the US until March and allowing the virus to spread undetected. And New York City would be the hardest hit early on.
I am an attending physician at the Mount Sinai Queens Hospital. We had over 60 patients waiting for a hospital bed.
I'm seeing young patients, old patients, people of all age ranges who are just incredibly sick.
I can't imagine my family being here with no one. So if I have to hold their hand while they pass away, at least somebody's there, you know?
Cities around the US moved to lockdowns to control the spread and prevent hospital systems from becoming overwhelmed.
He started off with these press briefings back in March where he was telling the public about the coronavirus and what they should do.
We continue to marshal every resource at America's disposal in the fight against the Chinese virus.
The president really thrives in front of the camera. It's one of his favorite things to do. And there was a window of time when he really had the nation's attention.
We're at war. In a true sense, we're at war.
But one of his strengths in front of the camera is that he likes to ad lib.
I would like you to speak to the medical doctors to see if there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure. And again, I say maybe you can, maybe you can't. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good you-know-what.
In public health, those officials say if you don't have one message, one unified message, you don't have any message. There were a lot of instances where the government just sent mixed signals.
What I saw not working well during this pandemic was communication and public health messaging. It's very clear that we need a clear, authoritative voice that we trust, that can unite us as a country, and that can guide us with the best scientific evidence.
But scientific evidence can change, and a lack of clear and consistent messaging from the White House would contribute to face masks becoming a divisive political symbol.
Back in January, the CDC was saying healthy people do not need to wear masks. The U.S. Surgeon General, in fact, tweeted a message in which he said, seriously, people, stop buying masks.
But then as we learn more about the virus, we realized that, up to 45% of patients can be infected, not have any symptoms, but be transmitting that virus in the respiratory droplets. And that was the point when we said, wait a minute, then mask makes sense, right? Let everyone wear a mask so that if they're infected, then that will contain those respiratory droplets and keep them from transmitting the virus to other people.
We were in an evolving situation. And when an evolving, unrolling situation is in effect, your information will evolve, and you'll be able to make decisions based on the most recent information.
The CDC in early April put out guidance to wear masks. However, Trump would emphasize it being a personal choice, one he often said no to.
I think wearing a face mask as I greet presidents, prime ministers, dictators, kings, queens, I don't know, somehow I don't see it for myself.
And while health officials and even Democratic rival Joe Biden would emphatically support masks, Trump would continue to avoid being seen in public wearing one.
If you are on the left of the political spectrum, you're probably very concerned about healthcare. That's probably one of your top issues. If you're on the right side of the ideology, maybe your top concerns are about foreign policy or about the economy. So there was this innate divide from the beginning about what exactly should be the top priority. And the president just never really felt that masks were going to be a panacea and just never really encouraged them. And people, especially his supporters, really adopted that, and that became baked into the public psyche that masks were not necessarily what they should be doing.
In your face! In your face! Can't you breathe better without it on?
By mid-April, state and local stay-at-home orders have fueled a devastating economic impact for many Americans. In the harshest downturn for American workers in history, employers cut 20.5 million jobs, pushing the jobless rate to nearly 15%. And even though Congress would pass the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, the largest economic recovery package in history, large-scale rallies would erupt all around the country.
We've had enough. So we're practicing what you see is our right to express our heartfelt feelings. We want to get back to work.
Trump would show support for these rallies, tweeting "Liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota, and Virginia."
It's an extraordinary fact that he is siding with these anti-lockdown activists and not with his own scientific advisors.
So what do I say to the science? I say I don't believe your science because I believe my God.
The denial of reality because authority tells you something. It's stunning, truly surprised me, the depth and the extent of it. We have a historic pandemic that's ravaging the world. And in our country, and we're not alone, some of the European countries are the same, there's a degree of political divisiveness that a public health issue has assumed strong political overtones. Namely, you are one ideology, you believe one thing, another ideology, you believe another. Masks work, masks don't work. It's a hoax, it's real. It's just extraordinary going through this right now. I think is unprecedented.
There was some feeling in the White House that this virus was so contagious that it was almost inevitable that people were going to get it. And at some point, the Trump administration decided that the best message was, let's just wait for this vaccine.
In late April, Bloomberg breaks news of Operation Warp Speed, a Manhattan Project-style US government-led effort to drastically cut the time needed to develop a vaccine. The project's goal was to have 300 million doses of a COVID vaccine by January 2021.
The Trump administration absolutely deserves a lot of credit for Operation Warp Speed. I mean, the amount of money that was poured in by the administration was extraordinary, billions and billions of dollars.
Through Operation Warp Speed, the US had a war chest of $18 billion to invest in COVID-19 vaccines and treatments.
The idea back then that a vaccine would be the way out of this was a really difficult thing to comprehend, because if you look at the timelines it takes to get vaccines developed, and the majority of which are not even successful, but it can take around a decade to get a successful vaccine to market. So the idea that you could get a vaccine in a sort of 12 to 18 month time frame that would be sufficient to help the world emerge from this pandemic was quite crazy at the beginning. In late spring, early summer, you saw a number of countries like the UK, the US, and the European Union particularly step up and create programs that would allow them to accelerate the development of the vaccines and also fund the vaccines on a wide-ranging platform to give multiple shots on goal for their countries, those regions, to have something successful. We saw similar efforts in China and in Russia with their own national vaccines that they were trialing and investing in and funding for their populations.
In the past, worldwide vaccine development was starved for funding. Big pharma and biotech firms usually focus on more lucrative areas like cancer treatments. From spring to summer, a number of vaccines would begin trials. Particularly promising were vaccines using a new technology called messenger RNA, being developed by Moderna and the Pfizer-BioNTech partnership.
We get this little piece of messenger RNA, which is relatively unstable. That's why we have to keep it frozen. We have this messenger RNA deliver the message that the cells need so that then we can mount a response to this virus, and then it's destroyed.
And even though its timeline was slightly behind other leading candidates, a vaccine being developed by Oxford scientists and drug maker AstraZeneca would get a lot of early attention.
The AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine has really had an outsized impact on supply agreements because not only can it be stored at refrigerated conditions, which makes it much more conducive to be deployed to the developing world, but it also is going to be sold at cost during the period of the pandemic, which makes it much more feasible for countries to purchase huge doses of the vaccine. So when you're thinking about which horse to back, AstraZeneca-Oxford was a really good bet at the beginning of the pandemic for both success, deployment, cost, and just the potential to be really effective in ending the pandemic.
As scientists rush to develop a vaccine, a summer surge of cases emerges worldwide. Any hope that warmer weather would tame the virus is dashed, as it continued its rampage across Europe and the developing world, particularly India, Brazil, and South Africa. However, China's strict lockdowns have allowed for life to return to normal for many citizens. Back in the United States, while cases in the Northeast stabilized, premature lifting of lockdowns caused a spike of cases in the Sunbelt. And by September, Midwest states experienced a dramatic rise in COVID-19 cases, with South Dakota alone having a 166% increase, and 10 other states reporting record one-day increases. The annual Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, school and university reopenings, and Labor Day weekend celebrations have all been cited as case links. Yet nobody was quite expecting a viral outbreak in the West Wing of the White House.
When I heard that Hope Hicks, one of the president's closest advisors, had the virus, we immediately started thinking it's possible that the president had it.
Word has come that one of President Trump's closest aides, Hope Hicks, has tested positive for coronavirus and, in fact, is apparently quite sick.
The fact that we reported on Hope's illness sent a signal to the White House that we've got deep sourcing, that they probably can't hide this from us, that no matter what happens, someone is going to find out. And I know that people think that there was a good chance that if we hadn't reported on Hope Hicks's diagnosis, that it's possible we never would have known about the president's diagnosis.
The president of the United States now confirming to the world that he and the First Lady of the United States have both tested positive for the coronavirus and they will quarantine.
President Trump received dexamethasone, remdesivir, and a cocktail of therapeutic antibodies from drug maker Regeneron that was not yet available to the public. At the same time, more officials were testing positive.
Breaking news, but it's fair to say there is an outbreak within the White House. Kellyanne Conway has tested positive for the coronavirus.
Governor Chris Christie now reports that he has tested positive.
Stephen Miller, a senior aide to President Trump, has become the 24th person connected to the White House to test positive for COVID-19.
There was a very much worry about it spreading throughout the entire West Wing. There was worry about his reelection prospects. There was worry about how this was going to affect their entire plan until the November 3rd election.
But after several days in Walter Reed, President Trump would be released and would return to the White House.
Walking out on his own, this image already getting attention back at the White House tonight, appearing eager to take off that mask and signaling tonight he'll be back at the campaign trail soon.
However, just a little over a month later, in a record-breaking election turnout, Trump would lose to Democratic challenger Joe Biden.
Here's your final tally in the Electoral College. This is for the history books, Wolf. 306 electoral votes for Joe Biden, 232 electoral votes for Donald Trump. As you noted, that is an exact reversal of what it was 4 years ago.
His advisors do know that the handling of the coronavirus by the White House and by the president himself, and his refusal to model some of the public health measures that could have at least put a dent in the coronavirus, probably killed his re-election.
As Trump's legal team aggressively challenged the election's outcome, there were huge developments on the vaccine front. On November 9th, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine reported to show a more than 90% efficacy rating. A week later, Moderna's vaccine would report 94.5% efficacy.
I was saying, boy, I'll take a 70% effective vaccine, 65% effective vaccine. It will be very helpful. It won't crush the outbreak, but it'd be very helpful. To get 95% effective vaccines from two candidates that were the same platform but different companies with essentially identical results, 94, 95% efficacy. I was overwhelmingly pleasantly surprised that that was the case. So that's the one thing I did not predict.
In the first week of December, the UK was the first to clear the use of a new shot from Pfizer Inc. and BioNTech SE. The US would do the same a week later. The approval of Moderna's vaccine would follow later in the month. Not long after, people aged 80 and over in the UK began receiving the vaccine.
The UK, as the first doses of the corona vaccine are being injected into patients.
The country's mass national vaccination program has officially begun. And to put this into context, this comes less than a year after the first case of COVID-19.
Vaccines being shipped to healthcare workers came as a welcome relief. As the US death toll surpasses 325,000, global deaths top 1.7 million. And reports of a new variant out of the UK show some mutations that appear to make the virus even more contagious. By the end of 2020, millions of people were expected to be inoculated. By the end of 2021, public health officials in some countries aim to have 60% to 70% of their populations immunized. Yet skeptics say that may be a challenge.
I think we're going to be far short of the vaccine we're going to need in the first 2 to 3 quarters of next year in the United States. I think that's still going to be a challenge.
And there's the logistics and distribution. Then there's finding the money. Then there's all the coordination. It's just a big job. And having seen the challenges that world leaders have faced in actually dealing just simply with the infection and trying to find a way to work on the infection, I'm thinking they will also face challenges with the immunization.
And even if the rollout of the vaccine in the US and the world goes swimmingly, it brings up an entirely new problem.
Well, I think we have kind of a double-edged sword challenge of early on, we're going to have many early adopters that want the vaccine, and we're not going to have nearly enough, which is going to create its own crisis, followed by what I'm afraid will be vaccines sitting there waiting to find an arm.
About a quarter of Americans do not want to get vaccinated. The skepticism represents a challenge as the country tries to control exploding infections, hospitalizations, and deaths.
Many are wary of the vaccine's unprecedented speed. Others are polarized by politics.
The depth of the scientific hostility to science, anti-science, which spills over into anti-vax, truly surprised me. There are certain regions of the country where in the very towns, counties, cities, where the hospitals are being overrun with COVID-19 patients, there are people in that area which are still saying it's a hoax, it's fake news, it doesn't exist. It's mind-boggling to see that.
The US and UK have reserved enough vaccines to inoculate between 150% and nearly 300% of their population. But poorer countries like Vietnam, Ukraine, and Uganda so far only have enough allocated to them to cover about 5% of their populations under an international vaccine acquisition group.
I want to ask all world leaders to ask themselves, are they viewing this from a truly international perspective, or are they viewing it from a parochial national perspective?
Ultimately, the impact of COVID will be felt for years to come. And how leaders around the world not only learn from this past year, but prepare in future years will determine the extent of the next outbreak.
It's not if, but when the next pandemic occurs. We do understand how important it is to be prepared, and hopefully we'll take the necessary steps to be prepared. We need to push the science, and we need to follow scientific advice. We need to learn to trust our public health officials, and we need to have that united voice moving forward so that hopefully in future pandemics, we won't be divided as a country.
While many things went wrong throughout the year, when it comes to COVID, there are still victories that warrant cautious optimism.
I think one of the things that we did do right was getting a vaccine, into patients.
I am totally impressed by the way in which scientists everywhere have cooperated like never before on the vaccination. And also, honestly, I want to say that the companies have done pretty well too. We will need a lot more of that kind of radical collaboration for the vaccination process. Not only do we have to continue doing what we've done, but we have to actually redouble our efforts to stretch our collaboration potential for the sake of the future of humanity, quite honestly.